Welcome in to another episode of the Barnes on Bama podcast. If you're new here, we discuss all things Alabama football and basketball, and this is one of the biggest weeks of the year as we have the Georgia Bulldogs coming in to Bryant-Denny Stadium on Saturday, as well as the first week of basketball practice. So we're going to start off the show by talking about the Georgia game, going to break it down, offense, defense, special teams. I will give my score prediction. And then there are a few more things that I was not able to cover or some news that came out since my episode that came out on Sunday about the basketball team. So I'll cover that at the end of the episode. So if you are interested, stay tuned for that. So let's get started. As I mentioned, Georgia comes to town this Saturday in what is going to be one of the most anticipated college football games of the entire season. This is a game that Georgia has had circled since their loss last season in the SEC championship game. This is a game that's been circled since it was known that Georgia was going to be coming to Alabama this season. This is a huge, huge game. You know, there's going to be celebrities here. You know, the former president's going to be here. Game day is going to be here. Josh Pate's show is going to be here. I mean, if you're a big name in college football media, you will be at this game, right? Or at a minimum tuned into this game. From what Reese Davis was saying, it sounds like ESPN ABC is going to, put some extra oomph behind this even because this is the kind of game that they would not have had in years past because it would have been like the CBS night game. So since ABC has this game, they're going to do whatever in their power to make this the game that it deserves, right? At least from a production standpoint. I will be at this game, full disclosure, so the recap, no matter what happens, win or loss, will come out on Sunday. So just as a heads up, I'm going to be at the game, so I'm not going to be recording late Saturday night. That will come out on Sunday after I go to church. I'll get it recorded, and I'll get it out as soon as possible, probably somewhere around the 1 to 2 time frame Sunday mid-afternoon if you are interested in hearing my thoughts. But let's get into this game and what I think Alabama needs to be successful at to win this game, and the parts of the field that I'm comfortable about Alabama and the parts where I think Georgia may have a slight edge, right? So let's start with each team's offense. And in my opinion, this is the place where Georgia concerns me just a little bit. And it's currently, right, when we talk about Alabama under Kalen DeBoer, you talk about how DeBoer and Nick Sheridan have been able to use Jalen Milroe to his advantage, right? You're not asking Milroe to complete intermediate passes. You're not asking him to stand back in the pocket. You're asking him to be an athlete, to create with his legs, to take shots downfield, to get the ball out to his playmakers in space. A lot of that's your quick passing game and then deep shots and not much of the intermediate game. And you've seen a lot of success with how Kalen DeBoer has been and Nick Sheridan have been able to mold this offense to fit the talent that you have around him. And from the Georgia side of the field, it's not that you haven't seen them mold their offense, but it just feels like the offense still is built for a guy like Brock Bowers or Ladd McConkey, and they don't have those playmakers this year, right? That's two guys that they're missing on their offense. And you saw them run that offense through them over the last couple of seasons. It was something that obviously Georgia has been very good in the run game, but part of them being good in the run game is the ability to go off play action and to, pass the ball at least well enough to open up the running game. And that's not something that you've really seen this year because Georgia doesn't have that playmaker that can break open the defense over the top when the safeties come down and run support, right? That's, at the end of the day, that's the crux of Alabama's offense, is run the quarterback, run Jam Miller, run Justice Haynes, and impose your will on the offensive line and make those safeties come up and run support. And then as soon as they come up and run support, you have Ryan Williams or Kobe Prentice or Jeremy Bernard going deep, right? It's force the issue running the ball, be really a run-heavy team, but take the shots when you have them because they're going to have to give you some shots or they're going to give up tons of rushing attempts, right? And the reason why I think that Georgia is just at a slight disadvantage when you're talking about the offense is they just don't have the explosiveness that they have had in years past. Not that they've ever been the most explosive team, but they've been a very efficient team, right? They've been a very, very efficient team from the offensive standpoint and have been rated as one of the top offenses in the country due to their scoring per drive numbers because they just scored, in most cases, more than a field goal per possession even without those true explosives. And it was because of the sure-handedness of Brock Bowers. You had Ladd McConkey in the slot. Just the way that the offenses were built, the way they're running back, and just everything melded together, it was a very, very good offense. That's not something you've seen early in the season. Not to say that Georgia hasn't scored. They scored 34 on Clemson. But you've really seen that issue, and that really came to fruition against Kentucky. All right? Kentucky shrinks the game, and Georgia just doesn't have a lot of success in that game because they can't really get moving on offense. If I have the stats pulled up here, Georgia ends up with 160 passing yards at just under 6 per attempt and 3.4 rushing yards, right? Georgia actually averaged less rushing yards than Kentucky did. The place where they were successful is they were able to hold Vandegrift only 4.1 per pass attempt, but part of that was also Kentucky's game plan. Kentucky is not meant to take shots, right? Kentucky's whole idea of that game plan was run the ball, try to make as long drives as possible, and shorten the game. Have there be fewer possessions, and when there's fewer possessions, that means that the chance for Georgia to score is less, obviously, and you can try to control the line of scrimmage and just give yourself a shot to win at the end. And if Kentucky goes for it on fourth down, they have a shot to win at the end. But they end up punting, they lose the game, and it was kind of inevitable Georgia was going to win it. That's something that you've seen out of Georgia over the first couple of weeks of the season. Now, is it something that they potentially could have found in the bye week because Georgia had the athletes? Absolutely, right? Georgia could have cooked up some plays in the bye week with Mike Bobo, and they could have some very good athletes that they get out in space and that can create explosives. But they haven't so far, and so that's the big thing. Because they haven't so far, they have to show it. Now, when we move to the defensive side of the ball, this is a spot where Georgia has been elite over the last few seasons, and still may be. Oh, wait, really quick. One thing that I wanted to mention that I forgot about the offensive side for Georgia is they're going to be without their All-American right guard, Tate Rutledge, in this game. He suffered an injury in the Georgia game, an MCL sprain. He's going to be out for this game. That is a very big deal. And the reason I look at it as a big deal, even though his backup has starting experience or has playing experience in this offensive line, is when you look at what happened when Alabama was without Booker, right? Booker moves to the left tackle, so you don't have him in his true guard position. You have him playing tackle, and you're without Proctor at tackle as well. The offensive line against South Florida, even though our offensive line was better than South Florida's defensive line, they still wrecked some havoc just because your offensive line was having some fits. That's something that I don't know that Alabama is going to give Georgia those same amount of fits, but being without your elite guard is going to hurt the inside run game, right? How much does it hurt it? That's the question, right? But it's absolutely going to hurt it. It may even hurt them in pass protection, right? So these are things, obviously, with it being a guard, maybe not quite as much, but this is something that is going to be impacted. And because it's going to be impacted, it's just something to note. I wanted to mention it because they have some injuries on the defensive side that I also wanted to talk about, but I needed to make sure to mention that Tate Rutledge is going to be out in this game. It's something to watch out for. We saw what happened on the Alabama side of things in the South Florida game when they were without some starters on the offensive line. And so I think that it goes without saying that seeing how Georgia plays without their star guard is something to keep in mind. Now, granted, they had a full week of preparation with those guys knowing that Tate Rutledge was not going to be playing. So it's at least something that you knew going into the game, but it is something to keep in mind. Now, on the defensive side of the house, Georgia has been elite for the last few seasons, and they've brought a ton of guys into the NFL, as has Bama. The place where I think Georgia has been really, really successful is Georgia playing more of, they really get the opposing quarterback uncomfortable, right? You saw when you look at like in their Clemson game this season, you have Cade Klubnik that over the last few games has looked really, really good. Cade Klubnik goes 18 for 29, 142 passing yards, an interception, 4.9 per attempt, right? Not impressive numbers at all. Versus you see that NC State game, Klubnik looks absolutely incredible. Again, we talked about the Vandegrift earlier. He goes 14 for 28, 4.1 yards, 114 through the air, right? Georgia has been very successful at stopping the pass. The place where they have had some issues, and they have been very good, but they have had some issues, is actually stopping the run, oddly enough. They have allowed, like against Kentucky, they allowed just under 4 yards per attempt. Against Clemson, they actually were very good. But it was a situation where this is something where Alabama's strength is running the ball, right? Jalen Milroe is best with the ball in his hands in space. This offense for Alabama is best running the football to set up the pass, right? Not pass first, then run. And this is a situation where I think that a lot of this is going to come down to, from the Georgia side of the fence, they have a few defensive linemen that are coming back from injury. Are these guys ready to play fully? Because I think that could impact the third and fourth quarters of this game. If these guys are fully ready to play and fully ready, at near to 100% and going to go through full workloads, and you're able to split the snaps, then I think that they will, this will be a game down to the wire. However, if Georgia is in the same situation that they were in that Kentucky game, and some of your defensive linemen have played 50 snaps, and the backups have only played 17 because you just don't have the quality of depth that you need, I think that Alabama running the ball and being imposing on that offensive line towards Georgia's defensive line could be a real issue. I think that Alabama's running attack could be an actual problem for Georgia if the depth is not there, right? I believe in Kalen DeBoer's offense and his ability to potentially, get a couple of explosives. Obviously, you're not going to be as explosive as you were in the Western Kentucky game. You may not even be as explosive as you were in the Wisconsin game. But I think that Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan will have the ability to cook up some explosives. But if down the stretch, Georgia is having to play defensive linemen due to their lack of depth, and Alabama is able to impose its will, and that's really what you saw in the SEC championship last season. Alabama in the fourth quarter is able to impose its will, and once Alabama imposes its will, Georgia really has nothing to do. Once Georgia gets uncomfortable, I think that's where you start seeing Georgia get off its game plan. And their new game plan goes to Carson Beck's got to throw it more, right? They get down a little bit, and you realize we can't stop Alabama running the ball. So we're going to have to score to beat them. And when it turns into we have to score to beat them, now Carson Beck is being just a pass-first guy. And I personally don't believe in Carson Beck at that level. Not to say that he is not a good quarterback. I think that he is. I think that the scheme that Mike Bobo runs is very good. I think that they do a good job of, making sure that he doesn't have to do too much, and that he can play to his strengths. However, especially if you go back and watch that championship game from last season, you saw Carson Beck putting the ball in harm's way a little more often than you would typically like. He is not somebody that, granted this season he has not thrown an interception, but he is not somebody that's without those throws that sometimes you would not want to see out of your quarterback. And if Alabama can run the ball and cause Georgia to get into the situation where Beck's having to throw it, right? Beck needs to throw the ball to keep Georgia, I don't want to say in the game, but like Georgia's like, we got to score this drive. So they start pushing it and needing to throw. That's where Beck scares me. He also scares me a little bit if you can put pressure on him. Carson Beck under pressure is not as good as him clean, right? That's not abnormal. Most quarterbacks are not. But when Carson Beck is being blitzed, he is not as good a quarterback. So I think that on the defensive side of the fence, the place where Georgia will have success against Alabama's defense is Alabama has actually been very good in pass defense, but our run defense has been suspect. So I think Georgia may have some success running the ball. I think a lot of that will have to do with the offensive line piece that I just mentioned about Tate Rutledge. Is Georgia still going to get the push on the offensive line? I think that the scheme that Alabama runs, being a vision defense, does very, very well at getting hands on the ball in the passing game, but is maybe not as good in the in between the guards power run game, or in between the tackles power run game. So that is a situation where Georgia potentially could have some success. But I personally put a little bit of extra emphasis on Rutledge being out, right? If the part where Georgia is going to be at a bit more of a weakness because of the injury is in their inside run game, but with missing their guard. Now, their backup may play perfect, and this may be a moot point. But I put emphasis on, if you're missing an All-American, there's going to be some level of drop-off. The question is how much, right? At the end of the day, that's what recruiting matters for. Georgia and Alabama are two teams that recruit at the absolute highest level. This game is going to have every recruit that Alabama has committed for this season, plus anybody who is considering flipping from another school, and probably some others that just want to see a good football game. I mean, the recruit list for this game is absolutely huge from the football standpoint, and we'll talk about here at the end from the basketball standpoint too, right? This is a huge game, and this is the reason why you recruit games like this when you have an injury that you need a backup that's going to play, to the top of their potential. So Rutledge's backup may be great, but in my opinion, I think that it's a problem. I think that it's going to hurt Georgia's inside run game. And when you've seen over this season where Alabama has had some weakness, it's actually been against the run, not against the pass. The College Football Nerds guys, if you haven't seen their channel, they actually talked about this in Alabama is one of the top against the pass, keeping teams under their average in passing, versus against the run, they're not nearly as good. Georgia's actually better against the run than Alabama is, versus Alabama's actually a very, very, very good run team. So it's kind of a situation where Alabama versus Georgia is strength on strength in the run defense standpoint. Alabama's slightly better than Georgia is, as in their offense slightly better than Georgia's run defense, but it'll happen when we see it on the field. And then on the special team standpoint, I think this is about a wash. Both punters are elite. Both kickers are very, very good. I think that the special teams in this one is not one that either team specialists are going to cost you the game. I don't think either team specialists are like, oh my God, they're going to win you the game, but I don't think either team specialists are going to cost you the game. Like, I think your kickers are going to make the kicks they're supposed to make. They may miss some kicks, but, neither kicker is suspect. Actually, Graham Nicholson for Alabama is the only kicker to have missed this season, but he was the Grozo Award winner from last season, and a lot of that had to do with wind. I don't suspect he's going to have an issue in Bryant-Denny. At your home stadium, it's something that you practice a little more, know a little bit more about maybe your wind keys from flags or vice versa. So I'm not suspecting that the kicking standpoint from Alabama will be an issue. Georgia's kicker has not missed this season. Both punters are absolutely elite. I don't think that the special teams is one that I'm super concerned about one way or the other. A lot of this will end up also having to do, we talked about the injuries, but the other key, and a lot of people, if you've watched any other previews of this game, have mentioned it as well, is that the secondaries, right? The secondaries in this one is something to keep an eye on, and less so the safeties, more so the corners. The safeties in this one, you got Malachi Starks for Georgia, very, very good safety, probably one of the best in the country, if not the best. You got Keon Sav for Alabama, the returner from Michigan, as well as Malachi Moore. Very good safeties in Alabama's back end, very good safety in Georgia's back end. The corners are where the question marks are, right? For Alabama, you've got some young depth you've got some young, talented guys. You got Damani Jackson, obviously the transfer from USC that's played well so far this season. But this is his first time facing Georgia. And then you've got some other freshmen that are playing major roles. And then for Georgia, again, you're replacing talented people from the past seasons. So it's a place where Georgia has not really been tested to this point. The last note I want to make, and it was something that Josh Pate mentioned in his preview, and it was something that I had actually not thought of to this point, and I had already kind of decided where I thought I wanted to go in this game and what I thought my score prediction would be. And when Josh Pate said it, I think it solidified what my thought is. And he was talking about last season, and last season, Kalen DeBoer in Washington faced Dan Lanning in Oregon. And not to say that Dan Lanning in Oregon is the same as Kirby Smart in Georgia. That's not at all what I'm saying. But what I am saying is, at the end of the day, where Dan Lanning gets his defensive philosophy from is partially from Kirby Smart in Georgia, because Dan Lanning was at Georgia prior to being at Oregon, right? Similar to Kirby being at being at Alabama prior to being at Georgia. It is a situation where there are philosophies that you know about each other, and your defensive scheme is similar. And Kalen DeBoer, in both of those games, was an underdog. And you could even argue in both of those games may have had the less talented roster, because on paper, Oregon had the more talented roster. However, in both cases, Kalen DeBoer and Washington were able to win that game. And it's something that you have heard talked about a lot when Kalen DeBoer was hired, depending upon who you listen to, was that Kalen DeBoer had won a lot of games with the second most talented roster on the field. And there was a lot to be said with that, because with coming to Alabama, very few games would you have the second most talented roster on the field. In this case, I think the talent is very similar, right? I think that Alabama and Georgia both have positions where one or the other is better. I think that it washes out to Alabama and Georgia are very close. And because of that, if I'm looking at this game being in Bryant-Denny Stadium, if I'm looking at the offensive ability of what I think Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan have put together so far this season, and what I've seen him do in the past against these types of defenses, and just what I know to be true, I think that Kalen DeBoer is able to win this game and is able to coach Alabama to a victory. And my score prediction is 27-20. I think that Alabama wins the game 27-20. I think that this is... It would not shock me if Alabama even potentially was able to score again late, like 30 or 34. I would not, guess that, but my thought is that this is a 27-20, and Alabama kind of pulls away into the third quarter, beginning of the fourth kind of thing in this game. I think that the injuries to the offensive line and defensive line for Georgia is a problem. When you look at Alabama's injury front, you've really got 4 injuries that they've been talking about. You got Malachi Moore that was coming back from the concussion. From the head injury, he's been able to practice and gone through protocols. Everything sounds like he's going to be good. Quay Russaw is been practicing again. Everything sounds like it's going to be good. The 2 guys that probably aren't going to play is Cole Adams and Richard Young. Richard Young's your 4th-string running back or 3rd-string running back, depending on what you look at it. Not the end of the world. Cole Adams, backup wide receiver, but really your punt return guy. You've seen really good things out of Jalen Mbakwe and Ryan Williams from the punt return standpoint. So I'm, again, not super concerned from that standpoint. I think that Georgia is, from the injury standpoint, is at a larger disadvantage than Alabama is. And when I look at these teams, is fairly close. When one team is playing on the road with the injuries, I have to give the advantage to the other team. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick Alabama. I'm going to pick Alabama by 7. It would not shock me if the game was a little closer, 27-24. But like I said, that's what I think. I think that Alabama is able to win this game. I think that I also do think that Alabama gets a pick on Carson Beck. I think that Carson Beck is a little loose with the ball at times, especially when he's pressured. And I think that because of the injuries, like the injury to Tyler Van Dyke and who Alabama has played such far to this season, they haven't had to dial up these super unique blitzes or these super unique offensive plays because they have, had the success. In the South Florida game, it was a lot closer than it should have been, but a lot of that had to do with penalties. It really didn't have to do with not being successful. It had to do with penalties calling back the successful plays. Versus at this point, you haven't really had to show a ton of your playbook offensively or defensively, whereas Georgia may have had to show a little bit more against Kentucky. Against Clemson, they obviously were running away with it, so they didn't have to. But I think Georgia, to this point, maybe had to show a little more. And I think that Alabama is going to have a little extra saved. And I think that Alabama comes out with the win. So, like I said, I'm going to predict Alabama 27-20. No matter what happens, like I said, I will be at this game. I will be talking about it on Sunday, breaking down what happened, how it happened, players of the game, etc. So if you are interested, please subscribe to the channel. I would appreciate it. As I said, we do Alabama football and basketball content all season, in the off season as well. So want to quickly shift over to the Alabama basketball content. For those of you that have not seen, I did put out a video on Sunday breaking down some of the recruiting as well as just kind of a season prediction and what I thought that my outlook on this season is. If you have not seen it, I would recommend checking it out. But I have a couple of updates that I wanted to put at the end of this episode, a few things that have changed from the recruiting standpoint, and then we'll get out of here. And so first thing, when we were talking about recruiting and visits for this Georgia game, previously I mentioned that there were going to be 3 visitors at this Alabama-Georgia game, and it was going to be A.J. DeBansa, number 1 prospect, Malik Thomas, top 10 prospect, and Darius Adams, top 20 prospect. Darius Adams has since withdrawn and will not be attending this Georgia game. However, he has been replaced by Braden Burries, another top 10 combo guard. If you have already seen the other episode, Braden Burries is the guy who I was talking about. We had heard some rumors that he may be visiting, that Alabama may be getting some steam with. There has been a lot of positive thoughts around Alabama potentially either being able to land Braden Burries or Mikael Brown Jr., potentially even both, but at least one of the 2 of those guards is what the staff is really shooting for. It's a really good sign to be able to get Burries on a visit this soon, especially with it happening this week. That's always a really, really good thing to see, especially out of a top 10 guy. So that's something to keep an eye on. Obviously, anytime you can get a top prospect on campus, Nate Oates, Preston Murphy, and company have done a very, very good job in converting the people that they are great fits to the system and converting those into commitments and getting, top classes. So really looking forward to seeing what happens. I'll be sure to mention whatever I hear coming out of those visits. But as it looks for now, at a minimum, staff is looking to try to either add Burries or Brown. Brown's already visited in the past. Obviously, we're going to have Burries on campus this weekend. I will mention, and I am not going to say it as fact because I do not know if it's true, but I have heard the rumors about the potential injury / high ankle sprain to one of the players. I'm going to leave it at that. I don't know if it's true. I have heard the rumors, though. I'm sure Nate Oates will be speaking this week at some point in a press conference, and I'm sure he will be asked about it, and I will let him address it at that point. From what I have heard, if it is true, it's a high ankle sprain. Player will be back in about a month. If it's true, then we will know at that point, but I'm going to leave it to Nate Oates to actually confirm or deny whether the rumors are true. I just wanted to address it because I'm sure that, people that watch this and stay in touch with Alabama basketball may have heard rumors floating around on the different forums, and other places. So I just wanted to address, yes, I have heard them. I'm not going to put out there anything past this, but once Nate Oates addresses it, then we can talk about it and say how I think that it's going to impact potentially the starting lineup and what the rotation looks like. But Yes, I have heard the rumors, and we will see when Nate Oates addresses it at the first press conference. So that is all I have to say for the episode this week. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.